conducted, we also had a number of questions on the local government system. And then that when we were ready to share those findings, we would call upon you and see if we can deliberate on the outcomes, what Ghanaians are saying about those issues. But just to sort of walk back a bit to 2019, when the president introduced two bills, one on Article 2431 and one on 55.3, seeking to make the position of the MMDC elected and to open the election of MMDCs and the assemblies to partisan elections. In the run-up to the referendum that followed, we know that there was a lot of discussion, and subsequently the main opposition party withdrew its support. There were civil society groups, different people who were also against it. And then eventually the president decided to withdraw the bills to ask for more broader consultation. The precondition was that if the nation was able to build consensus on this matter, the MPP government, when it got a chance to be re-elected, would reintroduce the bill. And I think this expression is found in the manifesto of the MPP, seeking basically that once it's elected, it would put the matter back on the table for broader discussion as to the way forward. Now we at CDD and with other partners, this is a subject matter that we have been campaigning for many, many years. So the withdrawal, of course, in 2019 was a huge disappointment. But like with many other reforms that we have advocated for, we've kept faith. And we think that this is so critical to our democracy and the sustenance of our democracy that we have to continue to engage, not just with government, but many citizens to be able to discuss how we move the process of local government and local government and the development outcomes that we expect forward. So we have gone to the field to ask Ghanaians a number of questions, and these are not just on the election of MMDCEs, but on the whole local administration system. And I don't want to say any more. I would say that I want you to hear what Ghanaians are saying, and I'm hoping that this will be a conversation starter for us to really do some deep reflection about our local government system, which I believe in next year it will be 32 years. No, actually it'll be 34 years. 1988, right? So that's 34 years of practicing the local government system. Take a deep reflection and begin to ask how we can move an agenda to reform it, forward. So thank you again for coming, and we look forward to the deliberation afterwards.
Main reason why we are here. So to take us through the findings of the survey, I'd like to invite Dr. Eden Salome, who is CDD-Ghana's Director of Research.
All of you again. I would usually have gone and given the reason why we are conducting the survey, but my colleague has done so. But one other thing we like to do before we present the findings is to give a bit of context to what was happening or what was being discussed at the time we were collecting the data and before we were collecting the data. That's what we usually call issues in the news at the time we were collecting the data. Now, this is important because as we know, sometimes our opinions are formed by things we hear, what we discuss amongst each other, what we hear in the news in particular. So we collect that sort of information from the headlines as reported in the news. Some you may have heard already because when I was presenting the post-election survey, I mentioned them. So I may not go over all of them. I would only highlight the ones that relate to the survey that we are sharing with you today. So, for instance, in the news at the time we were collecting the data, we had heard that the president had ordered all MMDCEs to hand over because their tenure had expired. And then the Minister of Local Government and Rural Development refuted the story, saying no such directive have been given. And you know, again, we heard that 1,300 candidates were reported to have applied for the position of MMDCEs across the 260+1 districts nationwide, and that vetting was also ongoing. Parliament, of course, was, you know, the appointments of the nominees was also ongoing. Of course, issues around corruption, COVID-related, issues of spending on a presidential luxurious jet that was rented by the president. We also had issues on, you know, illegal small-scale mining and galamsey. The Operation Halt was launched. The Fix the Country movement was, you know, also in the news. And then, you know, with the media, we had, you know, these issues of, you know, the national security operatives arresting some media personnel. So I will leave it there for the issues that were dominating the news. I'm sure most of these are not unfamiliar to most of you. And I'll move now to the survey methodology and demographics. Now, I'll take this a little slowly again this time, although we've said it many, many times. So we use a nationally representative sample of adults, and the key word here is adults. So when we say that, we are not referring to the entire population because the entire population is made up of age 0 to whenever. So we are taking only adult citizens, which is 18 years and above, voting. So that's a sample that we take. That's a frame we work from. And all respondents, as we say, are randomly selected, which means that everybody who falls within that subset has equal opportunity of being selected. Now, our frame comes from the National Statistics Office. We don't sit back here and, you know, come up with the numbers. We get it from the National Statistics Office. It is based on the population as is projected at the time of us collecting that information. We use face-to-face interviews in the language of the respondent's choice, which means that we translate the questionnaire into the various official local languages, which also means that if I want to be interviewed in a particular local language, that is what the interview is conducted in. This survey, the sample was 2,400 randomly selected adult citizens. And again, people go on about the population size of the country and why the sample size is what it is. I must say again that no matter what the sample size is, the margin of error is what's important. And then given the sample size, the margin of error for this particular survey is plus or minus 2%, and a 95% confidence level. The data we're about to present to you was collected from May 23rd to June 3rd, June 2020. So what kind of demographics do we get from this sample that we have? So again, I will emphasize on the blue part, and then the two columns. Look at the one that is in blue and the one that says adult population, projected population. Now, the frame we used was the adult projected population of 2019. Of course, the census has just ended, and people might be questioning, oh, why are the numbers, but we use the 2019 projected adult population. Now, if you look at the ones in blue, you can see how closely our sample mirrors what we have in our adult population. When it gets to the urban-rural, it closely mirrors that as well. Now, I will emphasize that the dispersion of our respondents are located in EAs that are the various towns and villages is 199. Now, the EA is the lowest denominator when you are drawing a sample. That's the enumeration area. And then the number of EAs surveyed was 200, and the number of constituencies with EAs, which the EAs are located, was 153. And for the purposes of this survey, because we're doing a local government survey, it's important to know that the EAs are located, the MMDAs in which the EAs are located at 129. So the age demographic, you can see 50% is in the youth range population, and then the oldest for us in this sample was 102, the youngest was 18 years. And for gender, it's split 50-50, not because there are more women in Ghana as it has been bandied around, but because we practice what we call the gender alternation, which means that if the first interview we conduct is with a male, the second will be with a female, and it's deliberate why we have 50-50 in our sample. So again, it was important to ascertain whether people's residency was permanent or non-permanent because of the type of survey it was. As you can see, 90%, 98% of our sample are permanent residents or wherever they live, and the length of stay was equally as important. And it's only 2% that had stayed in their residences for less than a year, 47% over 16 to 20 years. When it comes to education, again, you see that the highest in our sample, 29% are those who have attained a junior high school or not completed it, followed by a senior high school, and then 11% university and 13% non-farm. I'm just picking on a few of them, not all. When it comes to religion, we see 80% and then 16% for 80% for Christianity and then 16% for Islam. And then when it comes to employment, again, the highest of half of the sample had a job, 50%, and 23 did not have a job and were not looking, and 16% no job and are looking. And then when it gets to the allocation of occupation, we see that our society is largely informal. Again, over there you see 50% of the sample are people who are either in the agricultural sector or the trading sector. Only 2% are in the upper professional level, which is something we must look at in future, why our population occupation is in the very informal sector. So I'm going to now go straight to the findings, and I'll begin with what people know of local government, their functions, citizens' perceptions, and their participation in local governance, because after all, local government is a two-way stream. Citizens are supposed to participate in that as well. So we wanted to find out whether people knew the primary responsibility, who held the primary responsibility, whether it was central or local government. And again, we see that a majority at least correctly ascribed some service delivery and local revenue mobilization functions correctly to the MMDAs. So things such as collecting tolls, collecting property taxes, setting rates, maintaining health standards, marketplaces, and managing schools were, kind of correctly ascribed to the MMDAs. Again, still on the functions and the responsibilities, we see that when it gets to certain things, citizens are ascribing a shared responsibility of between central and government, local governments, and then traditional leaders and then community members. So you see that for maintaining law and order in a community, citizens have a three-way responsibility, have ascribed a three-way responsibility between themselves, local government, and traditional authority. And then we see the same thing with keeping the community clean, which is quite heartwarming because now citizens know that they have a responsibility in keeping their communities clean. It's not a one-sided affair. But when it gets to, still on the responsibilities, when it gets to solving disputes in the community, we see that more than half of our respondents are ascribing that to traditional leaders. The traditional leaders have the responsibility of settling disputes in the community. Now, the other thing about, local governments is that, meetings have to be held so that citizens can participate in what's going on. So we wanted to know how the regularity of MMDAs community meetings. And we see, again, the large majority of those who interviewed say that the MMDAs never held meetings with their communities to discuss revenue mobilization, expenditure, service delivery, and development issues. And now these are the bottom line of decentralization. But as you can see, on average, 7 in 10, close to 8 in 10 are saying that these meetings were never held. Again, we see a strong indication that if the opportunity is given for that interface, citizens are definitely willing to participate in those meetings, because they reported that if their MMDAs held the meetings, with their majority say that they participated in those meetings once, twice, or several times and often. I think he is slower than I am. Okay, so again, let's look at the perceived usefulness of the MMDA local community meetings. Again, we see that a large majority of those who had participated, not everybody, only those, so now we are looking at only those who participated in the meeting, are saying that the MMDAs found these engagements to be very useful or somewhat useful. So again, most of the things that they're supposed to be discussing, which is encouraging people to offer communal service for a community, discuss strategies to improve healthcare, and so on and so forth, all the way to telling people how the assembly spent their district common fund, for instance. They found these to be very useful, and all of these are in the high 70s and 80s, 80%. So part of what we call good citizenship is, how much contact, citizens have with formal and informal leaders. Now, informal leaders would be those who are outside of the state's apparatus, so religious leaders and traditional authorities. And the formal ones would be, example would be the local government authorities. So we see again that the percentages of Ghanaians who engage with their formal and informal leaders in the past 12 months are quite low. But relatively better for traditional authorities. So we see that people are engaging with their traditional authorities more than, with, a parliamentarian, for instance. So it's only 7% shy of an absolute majority saying that they participated, they contacted their parliamentarian. No, sorry, the official of the government agencies of the district or the parliamentarian. Okay, so if they're having contact with their leaders, how easy or difficult is it to get informal leaders to listen to them? Again, we are seeing that a majority are saying that it is either very easy or easy to get traditional rulers or opinion leaders, unit committee members, and local government representatives than the MMDA officials and political party officials, public officials, and government agencies and parliamentarians to listen to them. Okay, so I'm now going to move from knowledge of these things to support for elections of MMDCEs, and of course that has been very topical in the last few weeks. So we asked the question, I think move on to the next slide. We asked the question whether people supported the election of MMDCs, because largely we know that they've been appointed. going. Anyway, so we see that a large majority, now I'm telling you, you're not seeing it, so it doesn't matter. That's the truth. So we see that, yeah, a large majority, 7 in 10, are in favor of election of MMDCs, and just 20% still want the MMDCEs to be appointed by the president as we currently have it. Okay, so now this question, we asked this question in one of our previous surveys, which is the Afrobarometer survey. This particular question, I want us to see what the results were then and what we found now. And so that survey, we asked that question in 2008 and 2017, right? So we see that between 2008 and 2017, support for election of MMDCs has increased significantly by 16 percentage points, while support for appointment of the president has declined by 7 percentage points. So the green line shows you what it is, and then the red line does. So we've seen a decline in support for appointments and an increase in support for elections. So we wanted to also see again, how this looks when we compare the regions. And of course, then we had 10 regions, now we have 16 regions. So some parts are blank. It's not because we didn't collect the data, but we didn't have those same regions. Again, we see across the regions, support for election of MMDCEs has been generally high between 2008 and 2021. And we see that the change is higher in some regions. We also wanted to see whether there were differences between the urban and rural divide. And again, we see that election of MMDCs has been very high in both urban and rural divides across the country. However, it is only in 2008 that we find a significant difference between urban and rural support for election of MMDCEs. So I'll be showing this by number of our demographics, so we'll get to the meat of this soon. So again, we wanted to see whether there was any differences when it comes to the political parties. And again, in here, we are comparing previous surveys that have the same question to see whether there are differences. Again, we see that there's a bipartisan support, and that irrespective of the political party affiliation, there's a support of election of MMDCEs. Again, by age group, what we notice is that between 2008 and 2021, the support for the election of MMDCEs has increased significantly across the age groups. So you see with young people, you see a 29% jump there in terms of their support, all the way down to those who are 66 years and more. We've seen increases all across both the age groups. And then by gender, again, we see that since 2008, the support for election of MMDCs has generally been high amongst both genders. All right, so if the general view is that MMDC should be elected, what formats are people thinking of ascribing for such elections? We see that only 20% of Ghanaians who want MMDCs elected prefer a partisan election format. The majority, which is 71%, opted for a non-partisan election format, which is similar to the one used currently. Now, we'll take note of the 20% because we'll drill down a bit more as I go along. So now I'll look at first, I think I'm showing the wrong slides. I'll look first at those who prefer the non-partisan election format. Again, I'll compare when we asked the question in 2017 and then when we asked it in this current survey. So again, listen to me. Don't look at what he's showing. Now you can look. Between 2017 and 2021, the preference for election of MMDCEs on non-partisan basis has increased by 12 percentage points, while the preference for partisan election format has declined by 20%. And then we'll look at it by region again and see how the regions what the regions are telling us. This is a format, so the non-partisan, so I'm now focusing on non-partisan, those who say non-partisan election format. So I'm focusing only on those who are choosing a non-partisan election format. So again, we see that the non-partisan election format of MMDCs has increased significantly across all of our regions between 2017 and 2021. You know, notably, you can see that Upper West is gone significantly higher, Northern region, and many of the regions. And when I looked at this, I was just remembering the number of applications that went for some of these regions for those positions. In the Northern region, it was 200. In Upper West or Upper East was 100. And so I think something is going on in these regions when it really gets to this. Again, looking at the preferred election format, I want to look at it by urban and rural divide. Again, we see that there's no significant difference between urban-rural preference for selecting MMDCs on a non-partisan basis in 2021. However, in 2017, while urban preference for non-partisan election was 10% higher than that for rural areas, Ghanaians in rural areas were equally split in their support for a non-partisan over partisan election formats. So again, we'll look at it by age and see whether there are any changes there. Again, we see that the preference for non-partisan format between 2017 and 2020 increased, 2021 increased significantly across all age groups. And then we'll look at it by gender again as well. The story is almost the same. And again, we see that the percentage has gone a lot higher. It's now 20% points between the sexes between 2017 and 2021. Okay, so what are some of the reasons that people are ascribing to why they want the preferred format that they are mentioning, which is, I'm now focusing on non-partisan election, non-partisan format. So for those who want the non-partisan election of MMDCEs, they believe that such an election format will ensure that competent persons get elected. Now, this was an open-ended question, so we had to recode these afterwards. And that it will promote inclusivity and forestall the winner-takes-all challenges in our politics, that it will prevent partisan influences and conflicts, and that it will promote transparency and accountability. That is why they want the non-partisan election format. So I'll move now to those who prefer the partisan election format. And their reasons being, this is the 20% I mentioned earlier on, that their reasons are that the current format for local government election has already been tainted by partisan influences already, and that it must be opened up to promote public interest in local elections. And that it will also promote responsiveness and development, and it would ensure that competent persons get elected, and that it will promote transparency, and citizens will be able to exact accountability from political parties. So, you know, whether you're supporting the partisan or non-partisan format, you still feel that whatever the case, it would exact some accountability from political parties. So we also wanted to find out what their opinions are about the possible outcomes of partisan election of MMDCEs. And we see that in general, except Ghanaians expect some positive outcomes with partisan election of MMDCEs. However, those who prefer partisan elections are more optimistic. So that's those, the red in the middle, who are saying that it will make MMDCs more accountable. So we see across board close to 8 in 10 having some bit of optimism about partisan elections. Again, still on the possible outcomes, we also see that Ghanaians expect other negative outcomes if MMDCs are elected on partisan basis. So in spite of their optimism, they still have a bit of doubt. That, however, the levels of negative expectations are about the same across the entire sample among partisan and non-partisan election supporters. So we also wanted to find out what the support for election of all MMDA representatives, because as you know, there's a third that are appointed into the assembly. So what the support for that is. So we see that there's a huge support for the change in law, the law for all local government representatives, including the 1/3 appointees to be elected. So Ghanaians are saying that all of those positions should now be elective rather than appointed. So, but the support is quite slim, but the majority holds the view. So again, when you look at that by preferred format for electing all local government representatives, including the 1/3, close to 7 in 10 Ghanaians prefer the current non-partisan election format for selecting all local government representatives. They want that maintained. And if citizens were to elect representatives to the MMDAs, including the 1/3. Again, when it comes to the views of the current non-partisan system of electing assembly members, Ghanaians are equally divided in their opinions on whether the current system of electing assembly members is really non-partisan. I think he moved ahead of me. All right. Go back to that slide. Go back, yes. So again, we look at the reasons for preference for non-partisan election of all local government representatives, including the 1/3. The previous slide. We see that Ghanaians who opted for the non-partisan election of all local government representatives, including the 1/3, reason that this will ensure citizens' participation and selection of competent persons, reduce political interference, bring solutions to community problems, and ensure peacefulness, among other things. All right, so I'm going to look at now what the views are for, skip to the other 2 slides, what the views are about inclusion of marginalized groups and traditional leaders' involvement in local governance. Move to 2 slides, yes. So we wanted to find out what the views are for including vulnerable groups in local governance. Next slide. Yeah. So again, we see that a majority of Ghanaians approve the full participation of marginalized groups such as women, youth, and persons with disabilities in the local governance process. So we see high numbers there, close to 9 in 10 are saying that they strongly approve their inclusion in the local governance process. And then also there's a huge support for quotas for vulnerable groups in MMDAs. So Ghanaians want some number of seats in MMDAs reserved for persons with knowledgeable skills needed for informed decision-making at the assembly, persons from marginalized groups such as women, youth, and persons with disabilities, quotas to be reserved for them. So what about traditional leaders' involvement in MMDA administration? So Ghanaians think that traditional leaders should play a role in the administration of MMDAs. We see a high 71% there saying that they want their traditional leaders to play a more prominent role in the administration of MMDAs. Again, the small majority of Ghanaians believe that traditional leaders currently already have some influence in the MMDA's administration. However, there is no consensus on whether that influence has increased or stayed the same over time. I am going to end with the evaluations of local government performance. So we ask questions for people to reflect back 5 years. So what are the popular evaluations of the performance of MMDAs over the past 5 years? So we see that in general, Ghanaians rated their MMDA's performance in service delivery and revenue mobilization over the past 5 years negatively. So that's the red bars that you're looking at. So you can see that when it comes to maintaining local roads and bridges, 70% saying that they did very, very or fairly badly. It is only when we get to market tolls, collecting market tolls and licenses and fees that we see a bit of improvement. That 49% say that they did very or fairly well. Again, on the evaluations of the performance of MMDAs, we see the majority of Ghanaians believe the MMDAs have for the past 5 years performed very or fairly badly in a number of functions. So 75% say that they have performed badly in ensuring transparency of openness in the affairs of the district. They've performed badly in the involvement of all relevant stakeholders in their activities. They've also performed badly in meeting communities for their inputs into annual development budgets and plans. And they've also performed badly in responding to development and challenges of communities on time. And again, on the evaluations, it doesn't get better. We again see that they perform badly when it comes to meeting the community to explain to them the assembly's programs and expenditures, and then also exhibiting competence and knowledge in the management of the district, and then adopting a non-partisan approach in the management of the district. Again, when it comes to financial accountability and efficiency of MMDAs, we see that an overwhelming majority of Ghanaians say the MMDAs lack financial accountability and efficiency in the usage of the district common fund and then internally generated revenue. So I'm ending with bad news, but not my fault. So lastly, on citizen satisfaction with the performance on MMDAs over the past 5 years, we see that most Ghanaians are largely dissatisfied with how MMDAs have dealt with development challenges in their communities over the past 5 years. So on this rather bad note, I'll bring this presentation to an end, and thank you for indulging all the lapses in between the presentation, but I have my team here to take your questions as they come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salome. So, as we always do and per the agenda, it's time for questions answers, comments, recommendations, anything. So if you want to say something, you could raise your hand and the microphone will come to you. And when the microphone comes to you, kindly mention your name, where you are coming from, and then make your submission.
Thank you very much. My name is Gilbert Boyfio. I work with Parliamentary Network Africa. I just want to find out from CDD. I know CDD is one of the organizations that supported the election of MMDAs on a partisan basis. Given these findings from the survey, I want to find out whether the CDD's position on that has changed, or they are still holding on to their initial position. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will take 2 more questions and then we would answer.
Thank you very much. I'd like to find out from Dr. Salome if the survey addressed the issue of globally accepted local government elections, because it looks like Ghana is an island in this matter of non-partisan local government elections, even in Africa or West Africa. So did you bring this to the attention of the respondents? Because it might have affected their thoughts. Senegal, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania are all doing local government elections on partisan lines. And I think if we had brought this to the attention of the respondents, perhaps it could have shaped their thoughts.
How many more are we? I think my thing is.
Something to think about, because when the referendum was aborted, it was a matter of many people supported the election of DCEs, and the argument was it partisan or non-partisan? But from this presentation, it's clear that many of them say that they don't want the partisan approach. And I'm excited by what my senior colleagues earlier said, that it seems we are an island. We are lost in the process of local governance all over the world. In fact, countries who visited Ghana to copy, so to say, are able to do better, and they are now fully partisan. The Ugandans, the Rwandans, and even the Gambians are getting there. So why is it that Ghana, for us to be able to ensure effective development, why are we still talking about the non-partisan approach? And when you look at the responses from those who wanted partisan and those who don't want partisan, I think both of them came to a consensus that there will be better leaders elected, which I find it very strange, because there's no way you find a better person elected when we continue to do the non-partisan, because who is he going to account to? But when it is by a political party, the reputation of the political party ensures that they bring in their best foot in order for them to be elected, because when they get it wrong, it goes against them. So I believe that maybe there are some issues we also need to understand. Please indulge me. There's one issue that I think I got, and I want to find out how our respondents want us to reconcile. At a point, they indicated that they want all our representatives to be elected. They want all of them to be elected. Again, they say they want quota system. So, because the principles of the Wanted was to ensure that technical people who are not interested in local government, are given the opportunity to share their knowledge and experiences. So I don't know, how do we reconcile this particular one? Thank you very much.
About the same issue. The first one is whether the opinion being expressed by ordinary citizens over here is right, whether their preference for non-partisan election is right. I can't say it is right or wrong, but I'll explain what I also find with the data. And then our senior man also was talking about how do we situate the findings as we see now within the context of what is happening globally, where local government elections are being done on partisan lines, and therefore Ghana seems to be an island doing it in a different way or proposing a different approach altogether, which also tallies with what the local government person also said. And I'm happy he raised the concern as to why we are seeing the respondents saying they want all the assembly reps, including the 1/3 elected. Then at a point in time, 91% of them are also saying they want the technocrats to be given quota. You see, I think what we need to look at is the fact that the current system that we are operating by law should be non-partisan. But we all know that it is partisan. And in fact, some of the responses people give for asking for the partisan election is that even when it comes to the election time, the way the people campaign alone will tell you which party the person belongs to. When it comes to poster, you see the colors on the posters and you know this person belongs to this party. And then the parties even do their own selection, nominate people and push them. So people are aware of this, and therefore we are running a system that by law should be non-partisan. And yet we have discreetly made it partisan. And the partisan is not yielding any resource. For the years that we have run it, what do we expect people to say? Definitely, they will kick against the partisan one. So for me, when I reconcile that data, where 91% are saying they still want the technocrats, all that they are trying to say is, can we clean this non-partisan system and let it work? If we clean it and it works and we leave the non-partisan system to run as it should, I don't think we will have a problem. So for me, what I see over here is that citizens are against political influences that have led to a situation where we have not seen development. And therefore, they are now asking for that non-partisan approach. And we already have the non-partisan approach when it comes to the assemblyman and assemblywoman and unit committee one. How do we clean it? If we clean it and it works, would the people be willing to accept that? Why are they afraid? Even when you are doing it discreetly, it is not serving my interest. What happens when I allow you to even go full partisan? That is the question, I think, in the minds of most Ghanaians. It's just a matter of thinking through it and see how best we can manage it. Yes, I agree. Globally, most countries are going partisan approach. I have witnessed one in Nigeria before, a partisan approach. But why is it that Ghanaians are kicking against it? And I think this is something all of us have to debate. Is it just going and picking the non-partisan approach and running with it? Or we need to think through. We need to think through what are the consequences if we go the non-partisan approach. Will it give us the development we are looking for? Are there some preconditions we need to satisfy before we can even run that kind of system? And if we cannot fulfill those conditions, how do we even go back to the people and explain to them why we cannot even meet their non-partisan approach, but rather we need to go the other way? We need that kind of consensus. And for me, all that I see in the data is Ghanaians are not happy with the way the system has been run. They are not getting any benefit from it, and they know some of these things have been done discreetly with partisan influences, and they are not happy, and therefore they don't want even that open partisan approach.
because, you see, the story that you followed here, it's an interesting one. From the beginning in terms of people's understanding of the functions of local government, and to the end about the evaluation of local government, you have to ask yourself, whether it is partisan or non-partisan, would it deliver for us? Would it change the story at the end? And this is a very important moment in our time, because having done over 30 years of any type of project, this is an opportunity to reflect. Whatever decisions we make now will have serious implications. So there's no need, for me, there's no need to rush. There's a need, though, to really have a serious debate about this issue. I think there's a real opportunity. I think Ghanaians, you know, sometimes we think that, oh, Ghanaians don't understand what they mean and what. That is something that as researchers we want to interrogate further. And one of the next steps we'll be taking is to really do regional consultations on this to get a better, deeper understanding. But the reality is that whatever it is, we have to understand whether or not we will get service delivery improved at the local government level if we are running a non-partisan system as opposed to a partisan system. That evidence has to be put on the table, at least for us to be able to say this is the pathway to go. So we take a position that this is a discussion that we have to have. If you ask me, just based on my own experience and my the idea of a political system suspended at the top and a non-partisan system at the bottom, just the incentive structure from up to down just makes it very difficult for me to believe that constituency chairman and whatever and so on and so forth at the local level would be sitting down, putting their hands in their pocket and allow that non-partisan system to run. It doesn't matter whether it's MMDCEs, or they will get involved some way. So there are a lot of issues, as Daniel said. What are the preconditions to even ensure that even if you run a partisan system, it will not be, you know, on the side run by partisans? Because no political party that controls national resources will sit down and allow that a non-partisan system will run and they don't have a say in it. So I think that it's a good time for reflection. It is not just a question about the election. It's a question about decentralization. And we need to see how those two, devolution and decentralization, will work to deliver development, because this development happens it's the closest that people have. If we fix it, we would have fixed a lot of problems. So I don't know if I answered the question, but it's to say that I don't, even as CDD, we don't come to this discussion and say, oh, it's partisan or non-partisan. That whatever model we agree that we should move forward, we have to tackle decentralization. It needs to be able to deliver that development at the bottom. So that is one of the areas that we have to look at.
Shaped by global perspectives or opinions on the election of local authorities or mayors. I think what I will say about that is, if you look at the responses that, or the findings that were presented, and the reasons that were alluded or ascribed by respondents for their preference, whether partisan or non-partisan, you see that the reasons were common across partisan and non-partisan. It will promote development, it will promote accountability and transparency. One unique reason that you find with the situation of partisan election has to do with it will promote conflict, it will promote political interference. So what I want to say is that citizens have given reasons for their preferences. It will help us going back in responding to them what kind of election format we want to adopt. How do we address some of the reasons that they have ascribed to their preferences? And I think that is the way that we may begin to look at this as well. Thank you very much.
Sociologists, the findings, the patterns raise interesting questions. One is about, we can see this about maybe, it's not about local government election, it's not about the election of a local government representative, but about the quality, the nature of democracy we are running, right? What they are saying is that, respondents were saying is that democracy is not working at the national level, and they don't want the same dysfunctions at their local level, especially if we see the kinds of violence and other shenanigans that go along with national elections. And yet, when you compare this pattern to other patterns that we observe from the Afrobarometer, it's interesting, and you raise a bit of it in the presentation. The respondents were more likely to interact with the chiefs and local councillors than with elected representatives, right? But national level elections get a lot more participation than local level elections. So we are seeing some kind of contradictions, right? It looks like partisanship is important to people. You know, if you look at all the, what do you call it? The kind of celebration that goes with national elections and the emotions that it evokes means that, you know, election means that it's a kind of belonging. And I think it's a lot more strong than ethnicity, considering the way it brings people together. And yet, we don't see the same thing happening at the local level. And it could be a reflection of the way in which the election is organized at that particular level. Anyway, so I think these are very interesting patterns and they deserve further interrogation. Thank you.
On what Dr. Santi said. I think we are all to blame for the confusion we are living with. I hear from the manager of the campaign for MPP saying partisan elections. I hear from the president partisan elections, and all politicians in Ghana speak about partisan elections. Partisan elections is what we have. It is exclusionary. It's me and my people. Just look at the history of what the word partisan means. And you understand that it does not convey inclusiveness. You are very, how do I say, fanatic about your interest and your group. You must defend them, and so on and so forth. So it's not a word used easily in other democratic jurisdictions. You would either say multi-parties, and you mention the party's name, are they this or that? But here, we want partisan. If I belong to that class, I'm scared. I'll say, no, because of what we've observed. It is partisan politics. So the question is, how do we move from partisan politics to inclusive politics, where we recognize the civil and political rights of everyone? We are citizens. In fact, in those kinds of politics, you recognize the citizenship of the person, the citizen identity, their equal rights in various places, and which is guaranteed in law and the Constitution. We've chosen words that actually tells us that, Charlie, the thing should be fanatical. You see, it's us, and against them, it's war. But really, it's not war in every place. You find the trends. There are extremists, and you can find some who you say are very ideological. But to a large extent, what makes the system work are people in the middle who understand that we have different views or different ideas, but at some point, democracy is constantly trying to find the common ground. Otherwise, how would we survive as a people? And citizen defines it. So in our country, the more we say partisanship, I think the negative meaning to it is understandable, because our ethnicity and various other identities we play out tend to be, it excludes. No, but we are Ghanaians, so let's go Ghanaian and say, okay, as Ghanaians, what kind of politics do we want to practice? Should we call it partisan? Should we say it's inclusive? Because the partisan has given us a lot of exclusion. And that's what people are afraid of. So we need to really, you were talking about me. You said I wasn't speaking in here. I heard you. So I'm now speaking inside the microphone. So I think part of the work that needs to be done, the institutions that believe in democratic politics, is also identity. I think we are emphasizing the ethnicity, the regional, and so to the exclusion of all others, the party color. It's partisanship. And we need to move away from that and rather look at whether we do not have equal rights in a whole broad area. And how do we relate? Is it our access to jobs, to education, to loans, SMEs, or whatever? In the COVID context, do we exclude anyone? Or does the law seek to universalize rights as citizens? These are important concepts that every democracy education grapples with. So the use of partisanship, I think what you've gotten probably is also a protest against that word and the practice of it. And it's important that we bring this up. What language are we using, and what is the practice around that language? I think we want to move from that exclusion to inclusiveness. It doesn't mean don't be MPP, don't be NDC, don't be CPP. But what's wrong with, in a local government setting, and in an executive arm, knowing that the president is MPP or NDC, the chief executive could be an individual. The moment you open the space for parties, you open the space for individuals. But the individual that is chosen usually must have some extraordinary qualities. I'll give you an example. In New York City, you know, Mayor, he used to be mayor, but he's not. Michael Bloomberg was once, he says at one time, I'm a Republican. At another time, he's a Democrat. Okay, but he became mayor of New York. I think he exceeded the term limit. I think it's 1 term or 2 terms, and he got an extra year. But he went in not on a party ticket. He said he wanted to fix the problems of New York, and he had certain qualities, not only his money, his networks and so on and so forth. So they accepted him. But generally, independent candidates, if you take Canada, where independent candidates operate, they will operate in local government, but the mayors may not be necessarily from the party. In Holland, Netherlands, they appoint the mayors, heads of the cities and so on, from parties. But after elections, the king appoints them. So there are different systems. So here you cannot exclude both. Parties shouldn't participate in, MMDA elections, in the assembly elections. And then you also say, oh, they shouldn't participate in chief executive positions if we open them up. We want individuals. But you say this is a multi-party democracy and you want to build an inclusive society. Go to chapter 6 of the Constitution and see how the emphasis is not on partisanship or ethnic identity or religion, but citizen. And there should be no discrimination, yet partisanship is discriminatory. So I think our language, and maybe the politicians themselves have encouraged it, but after 30 years, this clearly shows, this is an indictment of what the practices have been. They say they are not getting the development they were promised, the peace and all that, but also they are confused about our unity. And partisanship doesn't mean unity. It means separation and very ideological. And so on. So how do we move that now? So there's a deeper meaning that we should interrogate. and engage, as Dr. Asante said, engage in a public conversation. It's not a matter of rushing to say, hey, hey, hey. Finally, let me tell you what. We must come to terms with the need to do two things, or understand two things. Election of MMDCEs without parties can be done. And it's done in other places. But you cannot exclude political parties completely from local government, because it is in local government that political parties develop their capacity to be development agents. Universally, whether it's a one-party state or not, they are in local government. So ours indeed, and I think I agree with the former chairman of the MPP, who says, it looks like it's a very unique thing. How do you exclude parties from playing any role in local government? But in reality, they found a way. Because they are parties, they have a lot of power. They are organized than any other group. They have networks, connections. How do you, and there's power in itself, and they want state power. How do you displace them? So we've kept them from local government and say concentrate on elections. And then we have two parties that have emerged because they have been in government and been in local government. They control the executive and its local government. If you open the system to other parties, especially the opposition parties, small parties, or which have been excluded, in the next 30 years, you see how they would grow and change the dynamics. So there is something conceptually and fundamentally wrong we must confront. And that probably will bring us into the mainstream of what is universally the practice. So we can say we're opening up, which is what initially it was, open up local government to the opposition parties, because the system does not exclude the rules of the day and the informalities of it, does not exclude the governing party from local government. They are there, but it excludes opposition parties. Whether you are as powerful as the governing party or not, it says that all the power in the executive is mine. So these are things we practice, but we now want to see how do we change them to build a stronger community, a stronger nation, get development on the table, and so on. So I thought maybe we should also look at these conceptual and how they've shaped our realities. And it should not just be no parties, no parties. How can you be democratic and say we are a democracy if you don't tolerate parties? In an important area as the local government area where development occurs, where they participate, where they develop themselves, not just as election machines, but public policy, they frame it and they put ideas forward. So that's my contribution to your debate.
Following the discussions so far, I think there is one thing that stands out, that is service delivery. The citizens that were engaged, like the conclusion of the presentation said, they are more interested in service delivery. And so I believe that whether elected or appointed, if that is going to deliver the service, they will not worry about who is being elected and who is going to be appointed. One area we need to look critically at is the 30% appointment, where the president is supposed to appoint people with technical know-hows into the assemblies so that they can deliver. We happen to have it not functioning or not working the way it's supposed to. And so currently we find it out that the 30% or appointment that go into the assembly go to help confirm MMDCEs and not necessarily deliver technical support. That is one of the areas that we need to critically look at, because if we have the technical or technicians in there who are actually pushing for policies, the right policies to work for the assembly, I believe it will work. And so can we have a way that we can check that 30% appointment of the president if we can legislate, or if we can look at the law that mandates the president to elect these people, and have a way that anybody who is going to be appointed will be vetted to be sure that this person is taking a particular technical support to the assembly, then I believe that we can also have very good service delivery. So we need to look at this thing holistically. But congrats to CDD for a very good job. Thank you.
That we can take away from here and then further engage in our various spaces. A few interesting points to note: that we've come to a point where there is a need for us to pause and reflect, because whatever outcomes that we want our local authorities to achieve should drive whatever reforms that we decide to implement. Whether we want to go partisan or we want to go non-partisan, at the end of the day, how are we going to achieve the development outcomes that we set for ourselves? Also, there is a need to embrace different views to find a common ground, as Dr. Akwete earlier mentioned. Because it appears if you want to take a stand, whether partisan or non-partisan, it will be difficult for us to really get the needed reforms that we are all pushing or we are all really aspiring to have. And that's the reason why the first attempt was truncated at a point in time. So the point about us having a common ground and building consensus on the approach that we want to adopt is quite critical. Then the nomenclature issue is also important. I picked notes from Dr. Akwete again as to how do we carry the message across. The idea of partisan appears to receive some kind of a revolt from citizens. But maybe if you can preach more about how do we promote a reform that will ensure inclusion for all citizens, that will promote the participation of all key actors in our democratic system, political parties, citizens, voluntary groups, organizations. To end it all, as Dr. Kojo Asante mentioned, we will be engaging at the regional level as well to really engage other actors to see how we can contribute to the process of building a national consensus and working with government to push forward the needed reforms to promote local governance in Ghana. On this note, and on behalf of CDD, I want to thank you all for responding to the invitation. I recognize all the senior CSOs representations that we have here from political parties, chairman, and from other organizations like the media, and everybody who had chance to participate in this session. We thank you very much. Going forward, you hear from us. We continue to engage in the process. So we've just started the conversation. I shouldn't forget the presenter and the team that worked on this research. We congratulate you for the good work done. And we hope to see you all again. Thank you very much for coming.